This is a conversation about reinforcement learning with human feedback, about the question of how to use, how to measure preferences, human preferences, when we build models, in particular transformer models, but you can generalize it to any kind of AI model. And it's in light with the recent, let's say, not so good reception of Gemini and Google's multimodal transformer that had some pretty strong racist biases in the way it was trained, and therefore also the results were not very satisfactory from a just societal perspective. This is a conversation about alignment. It's a much deeper conversation. By the way, it's a conversation with Nathan Lambert and some of his colleagues, and shout out to Nathan. His contributions are they could be more user-friendly, but nevertheless, I think the content is really deep and interesting, and therefore absolutely worth listening to. I'll put a link in my show notes to his material. He has a blog. He also has a podcast or whatever these things are these days. I mean, he's a big proponent of multimodal representation of his work. So let's say his podcast it gets translated into text, and his blog gets translated into a speech type form. So he's definitely multimodal on that front. Nevertheless, again, shout out to him. So I think the reason I want to do an episode about this, because this goes a lot deeper than just the Gemini situation. Okay, this goes in general into the realm of, listen, we humans are training AI, and we can decide what these models will do because we're training them, but we need to understand what we want. So there's two facets here. One is, what is it actually we want, which is a big question. And then there's the question also, once we know what we want, how do we actually make those models do what we want? Now, the latter one is a more technical question. For example, Dorsar Sadiq talks a lot about pairwise preference, classification. There are a couple of things that are pretty prevalent in the industry: PPO, DPO, reinforcement learning with human feedback. I'm actually not very versatile technically to really explain what they are, so I would encourage listeners to go to the vast amounts of resources that are available to explain that. But in a very big picture, you could think of the problem of the problem of aligning a model with your wants, right? If Google trains a model, if Anthropic trains a model, or Meta or whoever trains a model in this world will have a certain view of the world and will want to replicate that view of the world in the model. These models, they're a bit like employees. When you hire employees, you want to align the employees with your culture. You're not going to hire a person that is orthogonal to your culture. That's not a good idea, because it's going to make your culture more prone to disruption and things like that. But you also want to hire people that can add. You want diversity, right? And my conclusion, I'm going to go into more details about this and the problem set and why this is an interesting conversation. But my conclusion is that what we need to focus on as a society, whether it's at a societal level, so politically, or whether it's within companies or as investors, it's not so much about what are the actual values and the alignments that we want. It's much more about how can we preserve checks and balances, error correction? How can we preserve the most valuable asset that we have, at least since the Enlightenment, which is that we can replace ideas, leaders, doctrines, whatever you like, all the things that guide us, we can replace them with better ideas. We can replace them with better solutions. That's what we need to focus on. So whether Google has a good representation of its values in Gemini 1.0 or whatever is not so important. We need to allow people to make mistakes. We need to allow people to, we need to allow people to fail, but what we need a mechanism for error correction. To me, that is the most important part of this conversation, because that is the mechanism that we have. That's what we call democracy. That's what we call free markets. The sole purpose of democracy is to replace leaders with better leaders, to replace ideas with better ideas. The sole purpose of the scientific method, as we call it, at least the idea, the fundamental idea, is to replace prevalent academic research with better research through some sort of process, whether that is peer review, whether that is some sort of crypto, decision-making process, or whether that is through even authority. That's a different question. But we accept the idea that we can replace something with something better, which has been the biggest innovation in the era of the Enlightenment and ever since, and of course has been part of the conversation during the antiques within the Greek and Roman type of cultures, and then when the Christians came and took over the world, or the monotheistic cultures, so the Hebrews and the Muslims, and really dominated the world. Ever since, they kind of took that on the side. It became more, okay, this is the book, this is the doctrine, you better believe in that. And there's a lot of value with that too. But I think when it comes to this alignment now with the AI, and I could go on, I could write a big tome book here about this, but of course, I want to focus on AI and on the conversation between Nathan and his colleagues. The problem is really, look, what is it we want and how do we implement that? And my answer is, let's not be too gung-ho on what we actually want. Let's focus on making sure that we continuously change the setting, that we improve our ideas, that we error correct. How about we try that? This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's March 5th, 2024. This is Krim Delko. Since the last update, we're down roughly 9%. The market is flat for the year. We are down 17.8%. The market is up 7%. We're outperforming by 24.8%. The market is still open. The reason we are down is that has been quite a sell-off in the EV space, and that is driven by China. The Chinese government is having a sort of an economic summit where they talk about growth, where they talk about the goals and whatever else they're planning. And I guess there must be some negative news on EVs and generally incentives or things along those lines. I couldn't find direct news about why in particular the sell-off happened, but it did happen yesterday. It happened with all the EVs. Tesla was the main one, of course, but particularly Chinese like Li and Xpeng and NIO and those types of companies, they all sold off. Today they are doing a little bit better, but the US companies are still selling off. We had the offering from Albemarle, which is the largest listed lithium producer in the US. So they had a public offering. The stock is down quite a bit, so the market is not taking that well, and I think that is driving down also the EV space. What does it mean to do a public offering? Well, what the company is saying is that we want to raise more capital in order to pursue our goals, whatever they are. In the case of Albemarle, it is volume growth and things along those lines. But I think the market is perceiving this as, well, we want to raise money now because we expect it to get worse. We expect the cost of capital to go up because we expect the market to be more skeptical about lithium in the future, and we want to sort of build a war chest so we can sustain the tough times coming ahead. This is the way I interpret this. This is the way the market's interpreting this, and this is the reason why Tesla shares are down. Now, from our perspective, I think we are sort of back to square one. About a month ago, when Tesla had earnings, actually it was almost a month and a half ago now, I was in Europe when that happened. It was a pretty tough time for us. We saw the lows actually roughly where the stock is today. It then recovered about 10% and now it's back down. So what we're seeing here is really this really exhausting bouncing on the lows, touching new lows, at least new sort of 1-2 month lows. And that's very exhausting for investors. From our perspective, I think we do expect a tough couple of months because there is a problem with growth in China. And the problem with growth in China can also translate into oversupply, price wars, and things along those lines. Now, of course, Tesla has many, many vectors that can sustain this type of environment. One is strong margins, strong balance sheet, strong technology, strong product, strong brand. So all these things will help to guide it through. If you look at some of the other, even Apple is down. So this is also a little bit of a tech sell-off, and it's not just Tesla related. And I think the way we should look at this as investors is that some of the big brands, particularly the hardware brands like Apple and Tesla, will have some issues in China because the macro in China is suffering. And the reason the macro in China is suffering is because there is a real estate problem in China which needs to be solved. And that's probably also, this could be the main reason why the stock sold off yesterday. It's maybe not even related to particularly EV incentives. Maybe it's about real estate. If the government doesn't bail out real estate, then we'll just have a much more difficult demand situation in China, and this could lead to consumption problems and things like that. So now let's talk about the actual subject of today, which is reinforcement learning with human feedback and alignment. I want to keep it in those two vectors. They're not exactly the same because you can align with different methodologies. What's reinforcement learning with human feedback? So the idea here is that you have humans giving feedback to a model. So let's say you ask GPT to write a poem, and you then give two versions. So the model writes two versions, and then you tell the model you like this version better than the other version. And by doing that throughout a process that is pretty rigid, there are companies like Scale AI that are doing this professionally. So you have a very thorough description, let's say, of what you want these types of workers to do, and then they do it, and then you, in the process of doing so, you estimate a reward function. So you find a way to, from the behavior of the evaluators, find out what is the actual, what is the reward function, or in plain English, what do they really care about, and how do we maximize that, whatever they care about. Once you have that reward function, you can then retrospectively fit the model so it maximizes that reward function. So this is a two-step process. You first ask humans, what is it you actually care about? And then you fine-tune the model so it does what the human cares about. So this is, in my opinion, a very good way to estimate what to actually, this solves a problem, the fundamental problem, which is really, look, we don't really know what is a good point, what is a good way to represent the sunset in Los Angeles. Like, in other words, who decides what is a nice sunset? Well, how about we just ask a bunch of humans to do that, and then we have a sort of an aggregate in the industry, it's called reward function. Maybe an easier way to say it is, we ask a bunch of people what they consider a good poem, what they consider a beautiful sunset, what they consider a beautiful woman, what they consider a smart person, or whatever it is that you're trying to sort of guess or trying to estimate. And then once you know that, then you can fine-tune the model. So by the way, what does fine-tuning a model mean? Well, think about it this way. A transformer is a technology that looks at a lot of data and simultaneously creates a massive amount of distributions of data. What does that mean? So that means that, for example, we have words, I walk on the beach, and the words I walk on the beach, they belong to a certain distribution. Let's say they belong to the distribution of holidays, having fun, doing nice things with friends. Those words don't belong to the distribution, I am sad and I want to kill myself. Typically, you don't walk on the beach when you feel like that. So what variational inference is doing, which is something we discussed last week, is in a nutshell try to measure from, you look at a lot of data, and then you store this gigantic multimodal matrix in literally a very large matrix that has lots of distributions and sort of fits words, or in particular words, but it could be also other things. But let's just stick with words for a second. So it fits those words to distributions. Now, what this alignment is doing then is, think of it like the next step. Now we have this massive matrix of distributions. Well, at inference time, we want to know if I want to write a poem that was written by William Shakespeare, that certainly belongs to a certain distribution in terms of, okay, the words that come from a poem like that, they all are, kind of close neighbors in a, multidimensional vector space. If words are represented by vectors, they would be very close. But we still don't know which ones to use and how to predict the next word based on a certain prompt. So if we start with, a certain setting, let's say there is a park in Central Park, New York, and there's a theater, and please write me a poem, and then maybe the distribution of Midsummer Night's Dream could come up, because that is very often the case in the summer in New York City. They do a show there in the park. So the poem could be around Midsummer Night's Dream, maybe even the actual poem, because it's in that distribution. In terms of how we align or how we measure what humans actually want, there are also different other approaches. One is very popular. It's called DPO, Direct Preference Optimization. These names are all often chosen more or less randomly just to have a name, because the science community is very dependent on these types of acronyms. They can say I use DPO versus PPO versus RLHF. It's annoying, but it is how the industry works. Anyway, so we have DPO, Direct Preference Optimization. This is a more efficient way. What that is kind of in the realm of what I spoke about last week in the context of Dorsa Sadiq's presentation. And that's really, look, how about we just look at the vector space of poems and we try to have pairwise comparison. And we could say this poem is better than that poem, this poem is better. And if we can ask good pairwise contrast questions, then we can maybe relatively quickly and efficiently find the space in which, let's say, the model would really produce a nice poem for me. So I don't have to do all this, tedious reward function design, search with humans, annotating all the time what they like, what they don't like. Maybe I can use what's called offline reinforcement learning, or an offline data set with pairwise. I like this versus that, and that would be enough. There's a quote from Jeff Dean, I think he's chief science officer. He's one of the leaders of the Gemini team at Google. He said, you'd be surprised how much you can get out of machine learning models with simplicity. And this is one of those things, because what DPO really is just a very, very simple way saying we don't need that much granularity. Think about your life in general. Let's say imagine an AI wants to recommend you where to have dinner tonight in San Francisco, right? Do you really need to go through every possible restaurant, constantly decide, I want to go there, I don't like this neighborhood, I like that neighborhood? Maybe it's just enough if you do some very big picture, like fast food, no fast food, Italian, Chinese, Indian, stuff like that. And then, very quickly, the model could recommend you a couple of things which maybe are not perfect. It might not find that little off a hole in the wall pizza place that really has the best Napolitan pizza in San Francisco, but it will find you a nice place where you can actually have a very nice dinner with your date, with your girlfriend, your wife, whatever it may be. I think that's kind of the idea of DPO. So it's just less headache with a little bit less precise results, but good enough. So I just threw that in because that's what they talk about. I mean, let's not forget this episode is about Nathan's conversation with his colleagues, and I want to give them credit also for what they talked about. Now I'm going to divert a little bit and bring in my own opinion and my own thoughts into this, which is really the idea here. Of course, it's not just me regurgitating what they said, it's trying to add some value here. And the way I think about this whole problem is, again, there's two vectors. One is, how do we actually align, okay? Once we know what we want, let's say we have a society that knows exactly, look, we want to have, we consider a good poem to be this. Now, how do we actually implement that in a model so we get a good point? Let's say we have an AI teaching our kids history, right? How do we teach history? What does it mean to teach history? Do we teach history like, was Christopher Columbus a good person or a bad person? These things, we need to decide them before we can even train the model. The model is not going to do it for us. These models, and by the way, it shouldn't be even desirable, even if we could potentially find avenues where the models can start recommending to us how we should act and what we should like and not like. Even then, we should still have control over what they actually do because we want to be in control. I think that's, maybe that's controversial. Larry Page famously called Elon Musk a speciesist, meaning, well, who are you to decide that humans are more important than machines? Let's not go there. Let's assume humans are the ones that want to run the show here. But amongst us humans, and in context with animals and nature, we want to live in a world that is agreeable to us. Okay. How do we deal with, should we eat meat or not? How should kids be taught what they should eat? Should kids be taught what kind of car they should drive? Whether it's evil to not drive an electric car or not? Some people think it is. Some people think no. I mean, you should be free. How do we deal with all these things? So that's a whole political question. And then the question, how do we implement it? Now, my contribution here is Popperian. And I just want to add to this conversation. And, if Nathan's listening, again, shout out to you. And this is not a critique on by any means in what you guys are doing. But I think what we need is a little bit more checks and balances and error correction. We need to have in the system, whether it's at a place like Hugging Face or the Allen Institute or Stanford or Meta or Google or Tesla, whatever it may be, we need to have a system, a bottoms-up approach towards error correction. Hey, this is not such a good idea. How about we replace it with this? Hey, I think we went a little bit too far. Let's iterate. Let's have a system of iteration. This is exactly what democracy is. This is what the scientific method is. This is the success of financial markets with all its flaws. The one thing that financial markets have been enabling ever since at least the Amsterdam stock market in the 1700s, but you can go way back to the Phoenicians thousands of years ago. When we have a system of, the crowd deciding through actions and ever correcting, that's the key, okay? You can do better. We can always do better. There is no absolute, there's no true solution. David Deutsch famously talks about, the Gödel incompleteness theorem, even fundamentally that proves that. There's never a complete solution to anything. All we can do is we can continue working through the search space of the universe, finding better solutions. This is what we do as humans. This is the purpose of this thing called human intelligence. So back to AI, let's have a system inherent in the models, but not just in the AI models, but also in our own models, the way we are organized. Let's have a system, let's say within Google. Why don't we have a system where we have true diversity? You know, what's the upside of diversity is to have different opinions. If everybody has the same opinion and we define diversity just by the color of the skin, then we've lost this fight. Because whether you want to define it by the color of the skin today as being non-white, tomorrow somebody else will come up and change that to, well, you have to be non-white plus not have this type of hair, and it's just going to end up in terrible, terrible racism. What we need is true diversity, and the reason diversity is good, true diversity just means different opinions. That's all it means, right? Different opinions, different points of view. They need to be represented. Yes, they need to be represented. Only white people are definitely not the solution. But then imposing other views onto whoever, whether white or not, is also dangerous. What we need is a more flexible system that continuously error corrects. Okay, we went a little bit too far. Let's say Gemini went too far. The founding fathers, they were not black women. So let's not go there. Let's not rewrite history. Let's fix it. Let's say, well, maybe we can have a solution where we say the founding fathers were white and they used slavery, which was bad, and we hope they'll never do it again, but they did some good things too, and let's continue on the good path and improve society. That would be one solution. Things along those lines. Let's be aware of things, but not rewrite history in an imposing totalitarian way. Just as a tangent, this is now a shout out to Silicon Valley, coming from me here sitting in the middle of Silicon Valley, and it's something that I really, it's very dear to my heart, which is, look, I am more than happy to support, invest, contribute to the progress of technology and particularly artificial intelligence in society, because I think it's going to democratize a lot of things and make life easier for many people. It's going to make life also easier, more difficult for other people, but that's what technology does. But the one thing that I don't want is a backlash. And a backlash means a situation where people have their, you know, there's a movie, I think, with Ben Affleck, The Sum of All Fears. Yeah, I remember that movie. The sum of all fears is AI totalitarianism. If that happens, people will stand up. I've already had situations when I go back to Switzerland to visit my friends, they literally shout at me because they hate my guts for living in Silicon Valley. I didn't realize how much resentment there is towards Silicon Valley, because there is a fear out there that the people with technical know-how and also money and or both and all that they will take over the world. There's a fear. Now, whether that's correct or not, that's a different conversation. The fear is there. Let's not feed that fear. Because if that happens, we will have a backlash. We will have, you know, people, and that's a little bit, let's say, what Elon Musk did with his political activism. He sort of created a little bit of a backlash against EVs, which is not warranted because it has nothing to do. His approach towards, you know, decarbonizing the energy infrastructure has nothing to do with him having a problem with wokeism. Those are not completely. But again, there is this fear, and the fear is what matters. So I think this is a lot more serious. If we have a situation, let's say if we have a situation like we're having right now with Gemini and Google, you can argue to the gazoo. I mean, and I followed, let's say, Nathan's comments on this. He says, look, let's calm down. This is a technological problem. We can solve the problem. Yes. But still, there is the fear that there is no leadership at Google, and that leadership has been hijacked by fanatics, and that they are going way too far to the left. Same problem with the White House. But let me not go there. Let's get back to, this is my appeal to Silicon Valley. It's please don't feed that fear. It's going to hinder progress. It's going to make it very difficult for society to accept all these technological innovations. We are replacing cognitive powers with machines. It's going to create fears anyway. I think it's for the good, long-term good. It's going to democratize the world and all of these things. That's all good. But we have to be careful. We have to have a more balanced, we have to have more checks and balances in place. And it can start at home, within companies like, let's say, Google. So instead of replying to the Gemini fiasco by, well, we're going to try to make it less transparent in the future so people don't realize what we're doing. I mean, that's not the right approach. The right approach is, hey, we made a mistake. We're going to replace some people because that's how it works, at least in the US. You screw up, you have to go. In sports, it's like that. Why shouldn't it be like that in business? And let's not make the same mistake like Wall Street did. After the fiasco in 2008, nobody got replaced, and ever since, Wall Street is the most hated place in the history of capitalism, and that's not good, because Wall Street has functions, good functions. It's just that the people there took it upon them to take advantage of the system without paying the price for screwing up. We need to have better failure modes. If you screw up, you pay the price and we fix it. I'm not talking about executing people or anything, but there has to be accountability. There has to be the fear of the accountability of screwing up. So that way you have an incentive to have a more balanced error correction system in place. So that way you can approach better solutions iteratively. It's all about iteration. Anybody who works in Silicon Valley should know that. It's always about iteration. Whether you write a program, whether you write a model, whether you design a chip, it's always going to be about try and error, try to find better ways to do things. And the same way, this whole alignment thing can be done better. And we need to have a process in place that allows us to do that. So think about it also. What's the problem? I mean, this is the fundamental problem in monopolies. People at Google don't have the fear to be replaced, because Google has a monopoly on search. People at Meta don't have the fear to be replaced. People at OpenAI don't. They are very powerful because they have the technology and the know-how. And that is a very powerful position. Like, imagine a company like Tesla screwing up with the car in China, where there's 10, 20, dozens of companies waiting to take market share. You can't screw up in a place like that. You have to be very careful in how you align yourself with the market. That's, of course, the fundamental problem with monopolies. That's why we need to find ways to circumvent that. Look, these companies have monopolies. They have, the way technology works, and whether it's NVIDIA, even Tesla within the EV space, they have such a lead. Amazon in the cloud space, they have such a lead, or at least there's an oligopoly there now with Azure. But still, you have such a lead that people within the companies don't have the fear to be replaced. Now, you can replicate that. You can have a better way. I mean, to some extent, let's say the US was in that situation after World War II. There, this country had the monopoly on power globally. They used it in some ways, in other ways, you can argue about this and that, but overall, it certainly was a better system than the Soviet Union or other systems, even the European models, because it created a lot more wealth. Just as one of the whoever it was, and one of the former ambassadors said, look, I don't know about my system, whether it's better or worse. All I see is that there's 2,000 people waiting in front of my embassy, and there's nobody waiting in front of the Chinese embassy or the Russian embassy. That's all I know. So in that sense, it succeeded. And what I'm trying to say here is that we need to acknowledge the fact that the people who work in these companies in Silicon Valley as a whole has such a monopoly on power that's unhealthy. And this Gemini fiasco has shown that what can happen, and we need to find ways to error correct, to have a more natural, subtle way to replace ideas with better ideas, to have a more diverse expression of opinion, to iterate towards better solution. To summarize again, shout out to Nathan for his talk. I think this is an important talk that is very on top of everybody. It has to be on top of everybody's minds. We've spoken about this also at Orange Capital Partners. We have a large investment in Tesla. If we're right with our thesis, Tesla will become a monopolist in electric cars, in self-driving robots, in robotics, in energy storage systems, in distributed energy, even in solar maybe. So there's a lot of vectors where they will have a lot of power, because they will accumulate the know-how. They will have the know-how. And it opens up the question of how can we deal with this in terms of not being complacent, in terms of not making corporate mistakes, but also align much better with society. Thank you.